Hi, I'm Janae Osterhel, Boston Globe culture columnist and self-proclaimed resident troublemaker. This is the amazing and brilliant Jonette Ellis. I am a huge fan. She is a multi-hyphenate, an artist, a creative, a founder, an academic, an activist. I can go on and on. I just think she's brilliant. Um, Thank you for being with us, Jonette, and for talking about what I mean when I say mercy with us.
Thank you, Janae. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being a champion of the people of Boston. I always appreciate when you lift me up and lift up my work. So happy to be with you.
What inspired your poem and led you to turn it into a series of documentary style shorts?
Yeah, so I wrote the What I Mean by Mercy series in 2017. I've always been a writer, a poet, and used writing in general to help me think, to understand things and concepts. So I wrote it to help me understand what I mean by mercy. I launched an arts incubator around the same time called Mother Mercy. I hired folks to help me do a business plan, a vision plan. But in all that process, I realized that I really wasn't sure what I meant by mercy, and therefore wasn't always able to articulate it in a refined way to others. So I started writing poetry, and I started musing with conversations with self, conversations with lovers, conversations with the general notion of the white gaze at large. And through those conversations and exploring the concept of mercy, these 3 poems came out as an opportunity not only to understand mercy, but as an opportunity to build a collaborative team to bring the work to life. And then thus fully launch my arts incubator, not only understanding this word and this concept, but with a team of creatives that I knew how to work with, and that could help me, for lack of better words, brand what I was doing in the community.
In like one sentence, what would you say mercy means to you?
Ooh, one sentence. Mercy is the ability to move through space and time for yourself and for others.
That's beautiful. When you decided to make the poem into a visual, what was the process like between you and Amin?
Well, Amin, thank you for raising up his name. Amin has been my partner in crime in a lot of my early arts endeavors. Before the What I Mean by Mercy series, Amin directed a poem, our first short film called Damp Places. So the process was at first an explosion of excitement. Me feeling so proud that I was able to inspire my friend, my comrade, yet again, into directing and visualizing a project. And then also figuring out the nitty gritty of what it meant to like let go of the poem and to fully allow him to make his vision come to life, and not only give him space to let his vision come to life, but actually support that vision as the producer of the project. So of course we learned a lot about each other, and we did a lot of prep work. We went to film festivals together. As friends, we've always gone and seen discussions and explored concepts. So our friendship gave us a good foundation, a good cushion, but we actually started studying work together so that we could do this series in a sophisticated way with the actual process, or leaning towards attempting a process. Him and I have different perspectives on what process means. So it was great. It was an explosion of excitement. It got rough and tough, but we still collaborate. We're still homies. It was a gift to have him on the project, to have someone literally see my words and thus allow me to see my words in a different way.
What when I think about the work you do, it's so expansive. And in a lot of ways, what I mean by Mercy kind of sets up the introduction to your arts incubator. And since I know there'll probably be some people who see this and don't necessarily know about Call to Create and Mother Mercy, could you talk a little bit about what Mother Mercy is and how you created an arts collective, and it's almost sort of like creative activism in the power of Black imagination?
Absolutely, yeah. So Mother Mercy, I call it an arts incubator, and usually folks hear the word incubator in the business sense, thinking about growing business. And so my intention is to grow art and creativity, and to allow folks who don't necessarily use the title artist, but maybe use the title creator or thinker to identify with this work. It's a space where we are reimagining the purpose of creativity. And so looking at art, not just for art's sake, but art as a way to get closer to ourselves spiritually, art and creativity as a way to get closer to our personal liberation. In the incubator, we see creativity as a tool where we can birth new evocative ideas. But in order to birth these ideas, you need space to like rest and be renewed. And so that's where the Call to Create comes in. It's a cohort of artists. We're in our second year. I piloted the project last year. And it's a way of taking this abstract concept of an incubator and distilling it down and working with a smaller cohort to really incubate their process, to give them a syllabus, to give them a guiding question to think about, which I basically is what I did. I asked myself a question: what do you mean by mercy? And created some poems and then some visuals with it. And so essentially that's what I'm asking the Call to Create to do. This year, our question is, what are you willing to do? Which can be a very open-ended question depending on how you approach it. And with this question, this cohort is using a range of mediums. We have photographers, writers, graphic designers. They're using their mediums to answer this question for themselves and for their community, as a way to not only experience some self-realization, but to start a conversation, to have that creative cultural activism that you're talking about. They have a launch point to have these kind of tough conversations that they may not be able to have in another space. So yeah, basically I'm asking them to do what I did.
Yeah, and what you did is so special because it's, you know, in less than 10 minutes, I feel like you really, Casey Gerald writes this amazing essay kind of about, excuse me, the power of Black imagination and Black.
I'll take a sip too. Let's hydrate.
When I look at your work, and not just the, I mean, the poems themselves are profound and powerful. The visuals are amazing, especially the Abeyi in part 2. But can you talk a little bit about Black imagination as both a tool of escape and grounding and activism?
Black imagination as a tool of escape and grounding and activism. If I can answer in a circle, I remember, so Nikki Giovanni has this book called Racism 101. It's not a book of poetry, it's prose. And in one part, she's an avid fan of Star Trek. And I happen to be too, not by choice, but I was into being a Trekkie by my family. But anyway, she talks about how in Star Trek, in the original Star Trek, it's a Black woman's voice that you hear that goes out into space. That is the voice that the Starship Enterprise is using to communicate with all these different life forms. And she riffs on like how fitting and promising that is. And rooted it back to like the Middle Passage and how Black folks were enslaved or basically had no idea of where they're going. They're in this darkness and coming into this new world and having to like reimagine this whole new experience. And so I think that just our reality as Black folks, not just those who consider themselves Black Americans, but Black folks over the diaspora, who have experienced subjugation and oppression, oftentimes don't get the luxury of knowing what tomorrow is going to be. Well, and that's not just that's financially based, culturally based, in all the ways, just not being able to imagine what tomorrow is going to be. So it's kind of, I said in another talk before how it's kind of like the idea of escapism or fugitivity is almost intrinsically connected to Blackness and to Black people. And so I think we are just a creative people off jump, not just in terms of style and music, which those things are super important, but just creative in terms of how we decide to live and survive and move beyond survival for our families, for ourselves, for those to come. It's the imagination of our ancestors, right? That got us here. And there's that quote that is going around, "I'm my ancestors' wildest dream." And yeah, I just think that we are proficient, if you will, more than proficient in creativity and imagination. So I think I started in a circle and I kept going, so I'm not sure if I got to the exact answer. But essentially, I just think our very existence is where that radicalness exists.
Yeah, I've been very, throughout this next chapter of the revolution, while also on dealing with the pandemic of coronavirus, I've been thinking a great deal about the power of Black imagination and the ways in which we're allowed to explore and even give ourselves permission to explore, dream, and think and create. And it's one of the reasons why your poems made into films meant so much, because I think it's important for us to have the many nuances of creativity and art. And art is one of the most powerful forms of activism that we don't talk enough about. So that's why I asked the question about Black imagination. There's so many beautiful lines in the poem, but there's this one, and you do this a lot with elevating and amplifying, I think, Black womanhood. It's really powerful. Just in how you live, actually, is just a pretty sisterly, powerful, and I don't mean to gender, but it is very a powerful thing. And you say this one line, "My mother was a witch, what woman isn't one?" Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's especially in this day and age where we are, it's not taboo to embrace our witchcraft and our witchery. So I think there's a lot of folks who are having conversations around witchery, witchcraft, and in the spirit world. For me, before it was safe to even talk about it, I was taught to kind of identify when nuances in the spirit world were happening, and who actually had access to those nuances. And so for that line, I literally am talking about my mother. And it's interesting, who happened to be white and birth a Black woman. And so I'm talking about her, and through her and through the ways that she taught me to be a good sister, if you will, I was able to see and recognize the beauty of women through her, and our witchiness and our access to not only the spirit world, but just to our inner worlds, her helping me pay attention to intuition, to my feelings. And so I wonder what woman does not, and I know that it's important to, as a writer, as a poet, as you know yourself, words are powerful. And so the word woman can mean so many different things. And so I don't mean to be, I want to be inclusive in that notion of woman, and actually just want to bring it back to my mother. Like I love that you see it as an expression of sisterhood. But for me, it was actually just really connecting myself to my mother and all the things that she taught me as a spiritual person.
Absolutely. And I understand that as well. For those of you who don't know, I don't know how many people on this call that know Janet or know me, but both of our mothers are white women. And we miss them both plentifully. So we're lighting candles for our mothers today.
Yeah.
All of the parts are so special, part 1, 2, and 3. But part 2, for me as a viewer, there's such powerful imagery around the abbey and the coupling of you and the other sister together. What was that intentional? What was the inspiration behind making sure the two of you were together in your movements and in the shadowing of one of another? There's such a strong symbolism in that, like the coupling.
Yeah. So part 2 was co-directed between myself and Amin, and Denora Walcott is the other woman who also is a Boston native, but currently doing her thing in LA. The idea was each poem and each film can exist on its own, but we were trying to do our best to show the connection. And so if you look at all 3 of the films, the idea is to see a transformation into like a magical or different world. The second film essentially is a portal. And so the idea of having a person in the film besides myself, you're able to kind of get the notion that I'm becoming someone else, that I'm gathering the power of other women, of other sources, in order to transform and to get to this other side of myself. And so the inspiration of using 2 was, just to create that, the visual of being in a different dimension. And the world that we're in isn't necessarily the tangible world that we start in. In the first film, you see a desk, you see a couch, you see a tub, all things and is happening in the real world. You start seeing these hands moving around, so you kind of get this idea that it's not your typical space, your typical world, but it's still very much rooted in the norm. I have a robe on, so also like alluding to this idea of dream state. And so when you get to that second one, it's the idea of coming into this dream state, moving into this portal. And Denora and I, we've been long-term friends since college. We went to college together and have done artistic things. So it was just natural to be with each other. We didn't choreograph or plan heavily. We got our clothes the day before. And through our friendship and through our understanding of each other and rooting ourselves in the poetry, a lot of that kind of mimicking movement happened naturally. And so that's what I also like about this series, is that it's like we're talking about this portal and this transformation, but the stuff was actually happening for us as creative beings together, trusting the process, trusting the words, looking at ourselves on a screen and allowing ourselves to transform by being witnessed. The inspiration was to create this portal, this middle ground that would get us to the third poem, which becomes a little bit more literal again.
So I'm glad you brought up portals, because that means we get to talk about Emergent Strategy.
Yes.
I know that Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy, is a kind of grounding work that you return to in the Mother Mercy incubator. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that book and what that strategy means to you, and what you mean when you refer to portals and spell?
Yeah. So Emergent Strategy, thankfully, is becoming more and more popular, because, and the good news about that is we're all going to be having this joint vocabulary where we can talk to each other about this work. So Adrienne Marie Brown wrote Emergent Strategy, and as I was conjuring the notion of the call to create, I knew I wanted to have a syllabus. I just had come from an experience of teaching intro to college writing at Emerson College. And as much as I am a creative, free spirit, I like structure, and a syllabus offered a good support for this project I was doing. With that being said, I thought Emergent Strategy would be the perfect text to root the work in, because in this text, she's not only talking about community development, she's talking about spells, she's talking about creating portals, she's talking about leaning on nature as a role model for how We can decentralize power and foster interdependence. You're getting actual structural tools on how to facilitate a meeting, but you're also being taught how to stop hating on yourself and hating on your brothers and sisters who are in the movement with you. So I thought it was just a wonderful text that allows the reader to bring many versions of themselves to the work. Community development, nonprofit management, youth work has all been professionalized. I feel like as I was coming up into adulthood, I was seeing a professionalization of that. And with that, I think some of the nuance of community work, some of the connection to spirit, to art even, has been disjointed. And I saw that book as an opportunity to remind myself and to remind others that if we're doing this liberation work, this community work, we have to have the ancestors, we have to have the trees, we have to chant, we have to have mantras, all these things that might be pushed to the side as not fitting in the work need to be centered in this work, especially as Black people, leaning into all the tools that we have through our culture, through our legacy. So.
Yeah, that's what I like to say. The revolution is for 8-legged spiders, and we need all the legs.
Yes, yes, yep, yep.
There's another line that I love, a line and moment in the film and poem where you say, "No land knows me like I know myself," and I think there's so many things happening like in that line. It's like, excuse me, my dog is drinking water.
Hey, Peppermint Patty.
That can apply to women and them, and anyone who is not cisgender white male. That could apply to Black people and Indigenous people. That statement, like, no land knows me like myself, like I know myself, is just such a powerful, I'm gonna call it a chant that we should just say to ourselves every day.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why that, for you, that line was so essential to write? Like when I think about mercy and grace and forgiveness and these topics and themes around that, when that particular line for me was just such a moving line to revisit, to kind of keep in my chest, because it's almost like an affirmation that you need when a system is set up to not let you breathe freely.
Yes.
So what was it that led you to that line, and just even how it was displayed on screen was just very beautiful.
Yeah, thank you for that. I actually have a little piece of paper on my vanity that says "No land knows me like I know me." So I often look at it as a grounding phrase, a chant. So I'm glad that you're able to do the same. When I was writing that poem, as a writer, or even not as a writer, oftentimes when we're in like writing activities, you're asked to identify where you come from. And I think there's some ways that we lean into ideas or notions that aren't really real, and continue to raise them up. And so in saying that, I was trying to use my Black imagination and to open up my identity, and open up the space that I come from, and not just using the line, like my mother is my first country, not using a line like that, but finally identifying myself as my own country, as my own space, and declaring that no land, no flag, no nothing, if you will, knows me like I know me. And thinking about the poems and the films, starting that second poem, creating that portal, putting your foot down, if you will, and saying, I know who I am. I'm taking ownership of this space. I also like to play linguistically on the fact that you might hear man instead of land. No man knows me. So pushing up against all the things, all the ways that we're told man or the man know us or define things for us. So also making room and opportunity to deconstruct that. And again, having it show up in the middle to really help articulate that space of self-realization, that in order, you have to know that thyself in order to conjure true power, to master thyself, and make room for yourself in this world, to do the work that we're meant to do.
I just want to be like. My last question really is more an invitation for you to just bless us with the unpacking of the final scenes. Part 3 is just like, for now, from here on out, for the rest of the year, when I'm having a day and I'm really like on one, I'm just playing part 3. Can you talk about the decision to be in the kitchen and talk about death and also the disinterest and forgiveness? It's just so, the very last scene of you like taking the bite and like the mutual death, just let's get into that.
Okay, thank you. That happens to be, that was my favorite poem to write. That was the one where I literally woke up. All the other ones I was constructing, taking a line from here, marinating, showing folks, does this work? The third one was the first one where I literally woke up and was like, it's great. Like, I don't need anyone to tell me this is good, this is it. Like, and that last line, I'm willing to die if it means that you will die too. Like, I meant that, right? And so, I hope you do play that one on those rough days. Going to that point of radical imagination is thinking about what we're willing to do, right? And so in that poem and specifically, I think in all the poems I'm moving in and out of conversation with self and lover, but that poem and specifically I'm talking about the white gaze and the idea of reimagining a new world. Moving through that portal and coming into self and saying that we are going to destroy the system that you have. And if I'm coming with it in this moment, I'm agreeing to end it all so that we can reimagine a new world. How that shows up literally day to day is the nuance of the day. But linguistically, I meant that. And so coming into the kitchen, you know, the kitchen is the place where we gather, right? Around the kitchen table is where business is done, right? And both where we're gathered to love each other and hold each other, but also make some serious decisions. And so it made sense to place it in the kitchen. It made sense to think about what the kitchen conjures. You know, there wasn't actual cooking there, but alluding to that. The idea of having flowers and cutting flowers, showing the beauty, but also adding a little edge to it with cutting flowers in the way that they needed to be cut. In the back, you see Stop Killing Black People, you see a Nina Simone pin, you see the dollar bill, you see a lot trying to kind of bridge bridge this world of destruction with the world of like beauty and seeing yourself in this new world. So I felt like I needed to write that third poem or have that third poem in this piece as like the final, not the final cap, but as like the last step of entering or moving through that portal. And I think the kitchen and the kitchen table is often a portal for many of us, regardless of what you're discussing.
It was beautiful. It was like stepping out of the kitchen was like, and when I take this last bite, I'm stepping out of the white gaze. It's just like, yeah. It takes you to Toni Morrison and her very strong stance on that. And yeah. We have had such a rich and wonderful, but too short conversation today. Yes. So I want to thank everyone for coming today, and we will be sending out an email with a recording of this to everyone who RSVP'd, as well as links to Janette's website so you can learn more about the incubator, and also links to some of the books we talked about in this conversation. And my lasting thought before I turn it over to Janet is just really Janet's question to the incubator this year. You know, what are you all willing to do? Let's think
Yes,
about that.
indeed.